Słuchajcie, kiedy opublikowaliśmy aferę taśmową, jak wiecie, no ona w mediach istniała bardzo gorąco i jak to w przypadku większości kontrowersyjnych tematów, wszystkie media poszły bardzo jednostronnie, no nie rozumiejąc to, czy dokumentacja jest silna, jakie są dowody materiału, właściwie wszystkie media były przeciw i to, co było przykre dla, myślę, dziennikarzy, to nie było głosu rozsądku. Brakowało tego głosu rozsądku, który zająłby się tym, czym jest istota mediów. I taki głos pojawił się w Gazecie Wyborczej. Był to głos pana profesora Przytuły, którego, myślę, Gazeta Wyborcza opublikowała nieco nieświadomie, bo był to tak mocny i wyraźny głos ze Stanów Zjednoczonych, nie stojący w obronie tygodnika Wprost, ale mówiący o istocie mediów. Więc mieliśmy okazję później odbyć kilka fascynujących spotkań, rozmowy o jego doświadczeniach w mass mediach w Stanach Zjednoczonych. Są to doświadczenia niebywałe. Ja czerpałem garściami z tych naszych spotkań i postanowiłem, że mówiłem zresztą o nim wam na poprzednim spotkaniu, więc cieszę się ogromnie, że udało się doprowadzić do przyjazdu pana profesora do Polski i dzisiejszego wystąpienia. Zapraszam.
Witam państwa. Dziękuję za to miłe przedstawienie mojej skromnej osoby. Cieszę się, że pan Michał rozszerza przedział wiekowy, bo inaczej bym raczej nie mógł wejść na salę tutaj. Aczkolwiek kiedy mówimy o wieku, przypomina mi się mój guru z Public Relations, Edward Bernays, który w wieku 100 lat odbierał którąś już tam nagrodę, a zmarł w wieku 104 lat i powiedział, że jednym z plusów osiągnięcia wieku 100 lat jest to, że nie podlega się dużemu ciśnieniu, jeśli chodzi o rówieśników. No więc nie wiem, czy praca w Public Relations rzeczywiście przedłuża w jakiś sposób życie, ale właśnie moja perspektywa w tej krótkiej prezentacji kilkunastominutowej chciałbym spojrzeć na media w Polsce, na media w Stanach z trochę innej perspektywy. Oczywiście jedna to jest ta zza oceanu, ale także jako praktyk w dziedzinie public relations. Tutaj w Polsce prowadziłem własną agencję, także znam sytuację na polskim rynku, jeśli chodzi o PR, jeśli chodzi o media, a także jako wykładowca i specjalista, jeżeli chodzi o dziennikarstwo i public relations. Przez wiele lat miałem też okazję szkolenia polskich dziennikarzy. Pracowałem dla firmy Orkla Media, która już Polskę opuściła niestety. I także współpracowałem z telewizją polską. Stąd moje obserwacje i moje doświadczenia. Niestety ja wykłady prowadzę zawsze i łącznie z Polską po angielsku, więc będę musiał przejść na angielski. Mam nadzieję, że nie będzie z tym problemu i z góry przepraszam, ale w momencie, kiedy zaczynam wykładać po polsku, to cały czas tłumaczę gdzieś tam w tyle głowy i jest to po prostu trudne. Także pozwolę sobie przejść na angielski za chwileczkę. So the presentation is to deal with democracy and the media. And what inspired my presentation for today is the event that Michał just described for us, namely the debate that ensued on the heels of the so-called scandal related with wiretapping. And what amazed me was the areas in terms of the debates that ensued. The first area in the debate was legality of the recording itself. And many would claim that the very fact that the information was collected in an illegal fashion should have prohibited or even prevented Prof from publishing that. That truly amazed me, because I can quote several cases where journalists themselves would wiretap, be it politicians or business people, and there would be no problem whatsoever with publishing that kind of information in the States. The second area of the debate that ensued related to the interplay between the government and the media. Many in the government perceived the articles in Prof as an attack on the administration in place. Many in the media looked at the publication of those articles also as an attack on the government, and thus uncalled for, given the political circumstances that Poland was in back then and continues to be today. Obviously, this indicates a total misunderstanding with regards to the issue, what the nature between the government and the media should really be like, of which more down the road. And then the third area of the debate related to responsibility of the media. Many, especially in the media, would claim that the responsible thing to do for whoever would get a hold of those recordings would be, frankly speaking, to shut up and do nothing, maybe turn it over to the special prosecutor, and that's it. All of the three areas amazed me because none of those discussions would have taken place in the state where I live. So this is what I'm saying here, that all of those themes that were addressed in a totally misguided fashion, I'm afraid. So let's go back to those. Legality of the recording should be no issue whatsoever for the media. It's not a problem of a journalist whether the information was stolen or not, whether it was acquired legally or illegally. This is not a problem of a journalist when he or she decides to go ahead with publishing information. The relationship between the media and the government, the model that I'm familiar with, and I really think that serves the nation the best, is that of an adversarial relationship. In a moment, in another slide, I actually referenced Richard Nixon, who was hardly a darling of the media. Frankly speaking, he was universally hated by the media. And some of the people that prosecuted him the hardest later on made a career out of that and became big stars such as Dan Rather. So Richard Nixon himself said, quote, "This society is served best when the nature of the relationship between the government and the media is an adversarial one." Notice the word adversarial, please. It doesn't mean that they are enemies. It only means that they are adversaries, which means something totally different, of which more in a second. The last element, the responsibility of the media. The responsibility of the media is to collect, research, edit the information, and disseminate it to the society as a whole. There isn't anything more that the journalists are responsible for. Collect the information, check it for its veracity, or truthfulness, if you will, and then disseminate the information. Some of you who are in journalism may say, well, what about editing? Well, that's part of the processing of the information. But notice, editing doesn't mean censorship, which, frankly speaking, was very much present in American media on many an occasion. Let's take a look at JFK and all of his scandals that he was involved in. Nobody in the media really wrote a single article about that. The big game changer came in 1987 with Senator Hart, who, when running for the nomination of the Democratic Party, we say with the idea of running for presidency, said, quote, "We are running for the highest office in nation, so we need to be held to the highest moral standards possible." And then the media, and then he turned to the media and said, "So please follow me." Follow they did, and we all know how it all ended up. They caught him with a woman, a model, Donna Rice, and that was the end of what seemed to be a very promising career for Gary Hart. Now, so, as I just said, using the illegally collected material is not a problem. The role of the media in a democratic society is not sustaining positive image or perception of the government, is to be a watchdog over the government, meaning making the government understood in the broadest possible way, keeping them on toes, being a thorn in their side. And then, as I said already, the responsibility itself boils down to collecting and disseminating information. So what are some of the reasons why the entire scandal was misinterpreted, in my personal opinion, in such a way? And the reasons are very simple. The first one is politicization of Polish media. I have yet to find a truly impartial, truly objective weekly magazine in Poland. All of them seem to suffer, and definitely with newspapers, all of them suffer from some form of a bias, real or perceived, but it's there. The next element is the lack of standardized definition of objectivity. What does it mean to be objective? No one has ever formalized that standard in the Polish media industry. In the US, it's somewhat different, and I will talk about that in a second. When it comes to the broadcast media, obviously what we have in Poland is that council, the regulating radio and television, which from the get-go is a misguided concept in the sense that all of the seats in the council are allotted according to political quota. So that marks from the very get-go the media in terms of the political bias. The press laws in Poland, unfortunately, doesn't protect media fully. And I would agree totally with Matthew that what we need here in Poland is some kind of a Polish version of the First Amendment. And again, I hope we can talk about that a little bit more down the road. And then the last one is the lack of properly understood solidarity among journalists. Solidarity that I referenced in my article in Gazeta Wyborcza. Solidarity where journalists would perceive that there is a common interest in protecting the freedom of the press. So I may totally disagree with somebody, let's say, who is on far right, while I am on far left, but I need to protect his or her right to express their opinion, because next time it will be me. We call it in English, it's a nice phrase, to circle the wagons. The media in Poland hardly ever circled the wagons. Actually, last time they did it was a few weeks ago, and I would say for all the bad reasons, when the first article about Drugie showed up, right? And then there was a circling of wagon in the form of silence. We are just not going to say a word about this. So it's the worst possible form of solidarity. But in terms of saying what I said in my article, we are all Latkowskis today, meaning that we may agree, we may disagree with him, but he has the right to express whatever he wants to express in the article. That was totally lacking, and this is, I do not hesitate to say, shameful. So let's take a look at the media in the US and some of the things that possibly we could borrow down the road. And none of what I'm about to show is related to funding. So in other words, it's not related with the money at all. Matthew already spoke, and we all know, well, there is the First Amendment in place, which obviously protects the media pretty successfully. However, not too many people know about the ruling of the Supreme Court dating back to 1964, New York Times versus Sullivan, probably the most important Supreme Court decision guaranteeing the freedom of the press, especially vis-a-vis public persons. So that what does that mean? And obviously I'm not going to lecture about this at length. What it really means is that whenever a politician would elect to sue a media outlet, he or she needs to prove 3 standards, 2 of which are relatively easy, and 2 of those a private person also needs to bring up. And once those are met, a private person wins a case against the media. However, a public person has to meet the 3rd one. So what are those 3 standards? The first one is that it wasn't true what they wrote about me. Second, that truthful information was attainable, could be gotten from somewhere, but they didn't bother to look for it. Possible to prove. And the 3rd one is actual malice, which is extremely difficult to prove. And you might wonder, well, then why is it even in place? Well, to provide extra protection to the media, so that when a journalist, let's say Matthew in New York City, writes an article, an editorial, so that he wouldn't hesitate for a second, and what if I'm sued by somebody? Don't worry, go ahead. Obviously, it opens the floodgates for a lot of abuses, but self-restraint is well advised and seems to work quite well. The next element is the adversarial role of the media and its consequences. I've already alluded to that the media need to be a pebble in the shoe of the government and need to be watchdogs over the government. I already alluded to Nixon and Watergate. We wouldn't have had Watergate if we kept the standard of legally attained information as the only basis for running a story. Larry Flint is a very good case, and I'm sure many of you have seen the film about this particular case. Notice, nobody in the media really wanted to protect Larry Flint's filthy magazine. No, but what they fought about, and that's why they circled the wagons around a sleazy character such as Larry Flint, it's because there was something much bigger at stake, and that was the freedom of the press, and they all did deliver. Snowden is a different case, however, because even though the role between the media and the government is to be an adversarial one, New York Times, when releasing the information, actually consulted State Department, which was somewhat surprising to say the least. Okay, the next thing that we could borrow from the US is objectivity standard, which is written into SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists, and has been in place since 1974. Next, the more information, the better. Right now, we are in the year of 2 elections. I would like to hear all the information about all the candidates. I may say something controversial, but hardly controversial in the US. I want to hear about their spouses. I want to hear about their children and whatnot. And I, as a voter, want to decide which information is trivial and is of no consequence whatsoever, and which information is really important for me. Journalists editing that information, deciding on our behalf what we should and shouldn't know about, is a misguided way of doing journalism. Then the next thing that we have galore in the United States, that's different institutions that monitor performance of the media. I named a couple of institutions, most of which unfortunately are either far to the right or far to the left, but be it as it may, as long as you have both sides represented, that's not bad. So Accuracy in Media, Media Research Center, but also fairness and accuracy in reporting media matters. Now, we also have press councils, regrettably only a few, that monitor the performance of the media. And we even had a national, sorry about the misspell here, National Press Club. And above all, we also have codes of ethics on different levels. So for instance, ABC has a code of ethics for all the journalists working for ABC. Then the National Broadcasting Association has a code of ethics for all the broadcasters. And lastly, a local ABC station in Minneapolis, which is where I live, they also have their own institutional code of ethics. I think it is more than called for here in Poland. And then lastly, there is the institution of so-called public editors or ombudsmen, frequently mispronounced in English as an ombudsman. It's really a borrowing from the Swedish language. Those are people who represent the readers, the audiences, to media organizations. So, the main tasks of the American media is to write the first draft of history, right? And then the second goal of the media is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, which I tried to translate into Polish the best way I could. It does sound much better in English. And there are some problems that American media are facing. The increased role of advertisers, concentration of ownership, and quite increasing polarization of the media. I just want to accelerate and mention a few suggestions for the Polish media. The first one is less foreign capital, something that Michał was talking about. Next one, it's less or more or less. Those are the ways I put it. The next one is much more objectivity. Much less kind of a defending the cause, whatever cause you believe. I remember it very well when I was training Orkla journalists, and many Polish journalists would say, well, you know, we are in the process of the referendum on whether Poland should join European Union or not. We strongly believe that it will be advantageous for Poland to join the European Union. Great. Do we really need to write about any disadvantages? Well, there is the cause, but it doesn't mean that you are just to present all the bright spots of it. More investigative reporting. We are really not seeing a whole lot of it in Poland. I would say less of a shallow persecution of the presumed guilty person. And I see it when it comes to politicians, but also to business people. A little bit more of the context should also be given to issues, and a little bit of history wouldn't hurt either. 7, much less desire to support, to bolster up the government, even though the government may actually be asking for it. The example that I always like to bring up is the Buzek administration, when they introduced those 4 reforms that everybody remembers quite well. I remember Prime Minister Buzek turning to a camera and saying to a reporter, the media are failing to inform about the reforms, and that's why we are struggling. I think that Mr. Buzek forgot that media in a free country are not a PR agency working on behalf of the government. It was the responsibility of the government to inform the citizens about the reforms rather than expecting the media to do it. And the media shouldn't necessarily feel themselves obliged to support the government, especially in an international context. And then maybe we should try to shoot for some form of fairness doctrine that was in place in the United States for about 40 years or so. It applied only to broadcast media, but basically stipulated that the media were expected to seek out controversial issues, and then while covering them, they would cover both sides of an issue. I think that that is lacking in the Polish media today. I would say a little bit more control with all the round table discussions where you hear squabbling and you can hardly hear any voice, let alone any voices of reason. But I'm just talking about the loudness and the quarrelsome nature of the debates. An example that I can quote is from Santa Monica, California, where I listened to a debate involving 4 politicians. Everybody was allotted a little bit of time to participate in the debate, and if they were just kind of beating around the bush and filibustering, meaning using the time, the reporter would simply turn off their microphone, and that's it. And the rules were obviously known to everybody from the get-go. And then 10, this comes from my personal experience, less of trading of the content, media content, for advertising. In other words, oh yes, you have an interesting product, you have an interesting idea, but in order for us to write about it, you need to also buy out some advertising in our publication. And the last one, more solidarity, journalistic solidarity in the fight for the freedom of expression. We really need much more of that. Thank you. Na pytania odpowiem po polsku, chyba to będzie łatwo.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie profesorze. Faktycznie to, czego nam najbardziej potrzeba, to tej solidarności w mediach i takiej debaty, jak tutaj mamy, tak? Ta wolność słowa jest niebywale istotna. Ja wierzę, że to jest jeden z sukcesów Polski, jaki osiągnęliśmy w tej transformacji, że media były wolne i patrzyliśmy politykom na ręce. Za chwilkę też będziemy mówić o wschodzie, o Ukrainie, Rosji. Możecie sobie porównać, wszyscy wiemy, jak to wygląda. Ale poproszę 2 pytania do pana profesora, który będzie też naszym gościem, Sebastian widzę się zgłasza, który będzie naszym gościem wieczorem, więc niewątpliwie będzie okazja do kontynuacji rozmowy.
Sebastian Starzyński. Ja mam takie pytanie, bo te punkty, które pan wymienił, oczywiście ja się generalnie z nimi zgadzam, natomiast brakuje mi jednego. Otóż wydaje mi się, że sami czytelnicy postrzegają media jako tanią, prostą rozrywkę coraz częściej i media za tym podążają. Pytanie, czy jest jakiś sposób na wyjście z tego błędnego koła, gdzie media chcą serwować coraz więcej prostej rozrywki, niewymagającej przemyśleń, a tak naprawdę trochę służyć jako forma edukacji, podwyższania kapitału społecznego.
Ja sobie przypominam dokładnie podobną sytuację w Stanach, gdzie rzeczywiście większość zawartości mediów jest bardzo trywialna. Kim Kardashian, Justin Timberlake i tak dalej, i tak dalej. Więc u nas historyczna szansa powstała po 11 września, kiedy większość odbiorców mediów obudziła się i zwróciła większą uwagę na media. Ale niestety i wtedy media też zaczęły pisać i mówić więcej o polityce zagranicznej, o tym, co się dzieje na Bliskim Wschodzie, w Europie i tak dalej, i tak dalej. Niestety po mniej więcej 100 dniach wrócili do tak zwanej normalki. Jeżeli chodzi o Polskę, ja myślę, że sytuacja na Ukrainie, może nie aż tak dramatyczna jak 11 września, powinna posłużyć w jakiś sposób poprawieniu jakości, zawartości mediów i przebudzeniu się społeczeństwa, że trzeba zwracać uwagę na takie rzeczy, a nie tylko na showy, gdzie się gotuje albo gdzie się jest zamkniętym w pokoju ze zwariowanymi ludźmi. To tyle, ile mogę powiedzieć, ale pamiętajmy, że ta percepcja mediów wynika także z tego, jak się zachowują media i o czym piszą i o czym mówią.
Myślę, że mnie słychać. Dzień dobry. Chciałam zadać panu pytanie po angielsku, ale myślę, że zadam po polsku. To jest alternatywa. Może pan będzie mógł wybrać. Czy pan uważa, że wartością bezwzględną w mediach jest wolność wypowiedzi? Czy pan może uważa, to jest alternatywa, że najwyższą wartością jest moralna odpowiedzialność mediów za kształt społecznego życia. I dodatkowo chciałabym szczególnie zapytać o pana opinię na temat tego, co zrobił pan Snowden.
Więc tak szybciutko. To jest taka troszeczkę fikcyjny wybór, czy wolę, żeby mnie zabili i zgwałcili, czy najpierw zgwałcili, a potem zabili. Więc powiem tak, wolność jest najważniejsza. Absolutnie najważniejsza. A potem można tę wolność stosować w jakiś odpowiedzialny sposób, aczkolwiek trzeba uważać na to, bo najprawdopodobniej nieświadomie pani zacytowała Fidela Castro, który twierdził, że na Kubie mamy wolność słowa jak najbardziej, ale wolność słowa trzeba używać w sposób bardzo odpowiedzialny, co oczywiście oznaczało nie krytykować systemu ani Fidela.
Cieszę się, że pan tak dobrze zna Fidela Castro.
No, jest tam trochę bliżej. Teraz, jeżeli chodzi o Snowdena, to o jaki aspekt pani mnie pyta?
O aspekt tego, co zrobił Edward Snowden, przekazując do publicznej wiadomości informacje okryte tajemnicą służbową, nazwijmy to.
No to jest obywatelskie zachowanie obywatela Stanów Zjednoczonych. Uważał, że to, co robiły agencje rządowe, łamało prawa do prywatności i po prostu puścił te informacje. To jest część właśnie wolności słowa. Uzyskał te informacje i w jego opinii ta informacja powinna dotrzeć do szerokiego społeczeństwa, więc po prostu przekazał te informacje. To wszystko. Mnie tutaj nic nie dziwi, nie widzę żadnego problemu. Jeśli widzę jakiś problem, to widzę problem w tym, że New York Times się konsultował z Departamentem Stanu, co można puścić, co oznaczało, że Departament Stanu był cenzorem tego, co się znalazło w New York Timesie. To chyba nie jest odpowiedni sposób praktykowania dziennikarstwa. To jest taka moja opinia.
Słuchajcie, musimy się trzymać czasu. Panie profesorze, bardzo dziękuję. Ja wiem, że media są takim tematem, o którym możemy rozmawiać. On bardzo wciąga. Natomiast to, co chciałem powiedzieć, niewątpliwie rozważamy, żeby poświęcić Roundtable Mixer Media, dedykowany mediom i żeby spróbować wywołać tą debatę i dyskusję dedykowaną, bo jej po prostu w Polsce jest zbyt mało. Dziękujemy jeszcze raz.